Relations Cells, BITS Pilani, Goa. Hello and welcome everyone. We thank you all for joining in on time. I am Kavya and I'll be co-hosting this talk with Divish sir. Despite the busy schedule, we are grateful to the speakers for gracing us with their presence. Some information to be passed on before starting. If you have any questions during the talk, please type them in the question box on your control panel. The speakers will try to address those when they're not speaking. And we also have time for questions at the end. On that note, let's get started with the talk.
As a part of our Bitch 2 series talks, we present before you a session. We have invited our most accomplished alumni to throw light on the experiences and their journey, as well as to provide valuable insights on pursuing civil services, which is one of our country's most coveted professions. On our panel today, we have with us Mr. Nagarajan S., an IAS officer, Mr. Deepak Parikh, an IPS officer, and Ms. Padma Kari, an IFS officer. Our first panelist, Mr. Nagarajan S., who graduated in the year 2000 from BITS Pilani campus with a degree in Electrical and Electronics Engineering. He's also an alumnus of the Harvard University Kennedy School of Governance with a Master in Public Policy. He joined the Indian Railway Traffic Service through the Civil Service Examination in 2002. He secured an All India rank in the Civil Service Examination in 2005 and joined the Indian Administrative Service as an officer in the Tamil Nadu cadre. He has been the district collector in Vellore, Kanyakumari, Theni, and Madurai districts. Recently, he was appointed as a district collector of Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. He's also actively mentoring students who are preparing for the civil service examination and moderates them through the Bitch to IS Google group as well as the Telegram group. We look forward to drawing upon his experience and gaining valuable insights from his time in service. Great to have you, sir.
We also have with us Mr. Deepak Parikh, an Indian Police Service officer who is a proud alumnus of BITS Pilani and has graduated in Biological Sciences and pursued Masters in Software Systems from BITS Pilani itself. After proving his proficiency and ingenuity at Morgan Stanley, he qualified the UPSC Civil Service Examination in 2012 and became an Indian Revenue Service officer. He further reattempted the examination in 2014 and joined the Indian Police Service. He was awarded 2 trophies at the completion of training at Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel National Police Academy, Hyderabad, and is presently serving as the Joint Commissioner of Police, Ludhiana. We are delighted to have you as a panelist, sir. Our next speaker is the esteemed IFS officer, Ms. Padma Kari, who graduated from BITS Pilani in 2007 with a degree in Electrical and Electronics. Currently, she is the Second Secretary, Political and Information at the Embassy of India in Doha, Qatar. She was the topper of Andhra Pradesh in 12th standard. From serving as the legislative assistant to member of parliament to working as a research associate at the Foundation for Democratic Reforms to being a Prime Minister Rural Development Fellow, she was always keen on working for the nation. She has even worked with Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan, who's a former civil servant and a role model to ma'am. We are grateful for her presence and hope to derive immense knowledge from her. Handing over to Nagarajan sir for further proceedings.
Thank you. Firstly, I thank the Institute and the Alumni Relations Cell for this privilege for all 3 of us to be part of this evening and discuss about BITS to civil services. I'll start the discussion with an outline of what the civil services are, and I'll leave it to the panelists to continue. Since we have a very wide audience, that is, there are students who are here who want to know at the very early stage of preparation or a general awareness of what is the civil services. There are also alumni who are attending today's event who are already writing the civil services exam or in fairly advanced stage of preparation. So considering this wide group, I'll start from the very basics. That is, in our constitutional scheme of things, we have an executive, the legislature and the judiciary. Broadly speaking, the legislature, which is the parliament for the union, or the state assemblies for the states, they make the laws. The judiciary, which is the courts, starting with the Supreme Court and the High Courts to the various other courts, they interpret the laws. The executive implements these laws, that the implementation of the laws is being done by the executive headed by either in the union it is the prime minister or the chief ministers and the cabinet. So this is what is called the political executive. But below this political executive, there is a permanent executive in our country, which we have modeled on the Westminster system that the United Kingdom follows. So as part of the permanent executive, there are career civil servants. There are people who join the government and work for the government as a full-time career. Though the ministers change or the political executive changes, this permanent executive remains as part of the system. This is unlike certain other countries. There are different countries with different models, but this is what we have been having for maybe a couple of 100 years now. So in the permanent civil services, civil is as opposed to military. So the civil services exam is recruiting for a set of the highest executive in the civilian side as opposed to the military side. So through a common exam, the government recruits certain services called the All India services. That is the IAS and the IPS, which works for both the union government as well as the state governments. The same exam we recruit for a variety of central services. We recruit for the Indian Foreign Service, which represents India all over the world. By way of central services, there are a lot of departments which are under the central government. For example, taxation, that is direct taxes and indirect taxes, or the railways, or trade, or postal, or any of these services. These are recruited through a single examination called the UPSC Civil Services Examination. There are also other equivalent civilian posts. For example, there are engineering services which are recruited through a common engineering service exam. They recruit for a variety of engineering posts in the railways or the central electricity departments or certain military engineering service departments. This kind of recruitment is also done. There is also a specialized service called the Indian Forest Service, which looks after, as it says, the forests, which is also common between the union and the states. All of these are broadly civil services, but more specifically, when we say civil services in this context, we are talking about the civil services recruited through the civil services exam. So as far as this, there are many ways of looking at it. That for a career in public service, there are a variety of options. One could strongly say that the highest form of public service would be electoral politics. That is, you get to be part of the legislature and the political executive over a long period. So that is, I think, a very supreme form of public service. For our group, engineers, it is very less likely that one could go on for a career in the judiciary. There are also careers through civil society organizations, through a variety of public policy organizations. All these careers are there as routes to public service. One of these routes in our country till today, a very exciting career from the public service point of view is the civil service. Whatever we are talking about now, through the civil services exam. So one approach to the career is that it is a career in public service. The second approach is that purely as a managerial or executive career, which is comparable to an MBA, that you get to work in a large organization, or even if you change organizations within the government, you continue to be part of each of these organizations is very, very large and old. It is like a, so to speak, a Fortune 500 company, which is 150 years old. That kind of organizations, and the sheer executive and managerial excitement. That is another approach to joining the civil services. There is also, certainly, there is an aspect of nation building that far more than public service, that we are still a nation in the making. So this, though the services are starting from a colonial era, today they are a very integral part of this nation building. These conscious decisions have been made over the years by the political executive and recognized by the judiciary, that there is a nation building role, there is a neutral continuity and change that is provided by the civil services. So this is one more angle to joining the civil services. And in our common conversation, there is always talk about, power and prestige. That there is a great deal of prestige, particularly in smaller places, associated with the civil services as a career. There is a word called power that people talk about, that, civil servants are very powerful. I am leaving these two aspects completely away from the equation. I would only argue for the civil services as a calling, as an important way of entering a career in the public services. So I think this is broadly what the civil services are and why one should look at the civil services. I request my colleagues and friends to talk about talk more on this, and particularly the how of it. That how does one go through the exam, and how does one start preparing, and this kind of angle. I will request our co-panelists to continue.
Sir, thank you. Good evening, sir, and good evening, all of you. Thank you for providing this opportunity to share our experiences with you. As sir has already discussed the basics of the civil services, as per our earlier agreement, I will discuss about the scheme of the examination. Now, most of you may be aware that the exam is held every year by the Union Public Service Commission. It is called the Civil Services Examination, and it is held in three parts, which is the preliminary examination, which has two objective type papers. The first paper is general studies, which has a very, very vast and wide syllabus. In fact, we say that anything under the sun can be asked in that exam if you go through the syllabus. The second part is the second paper of the preliminary is regarding general mental ability and aptitude. So that's more like for people who are preparing for CAT or other examination like bank POs. That paper has some similarities with those exams also. So now for the preliminary examination, around 8 to 10 lakh people every year they fill out these forms, and 5 to 6 to 7 lakh people experience they appear, and then around 15 to 20,000 qualify for the mains examination. Now mains examination is a written examination. It has total 9 papers, out of which your marks for 7 papers are added in your overall evaluation and ranking. These are the 2 compulsory qualifying papers are English and one of your languages. The other are the 5 papers are, one is essay, which has earlier it had 1 essay, now there are 2 essays. It is for 250 marks. Then you have general studies 1, which is history, geography, then GS2, which is polity, governance, GS3, which is economy, science and tech and other aspects, GS4, which is new addition to the civil services examination after from 2013, which is about ethics, integrity and aptitude. Then you have all of you, as you may be aware, you will have to take one optional subject. Earlier there were 2 optionals. There's a variety of options that you can choose from, starting from engineering, medical to humanities. In my case, I'll also tell you about my case. Along with this, I started with the exam in 2011 when there were 2 optionals. So I chose public administration and philosophy because anyways computer science or software systems was not there. And then later on, when there was only 1 option left, in my second attempt I didn't do well with PubMed. So in my third attempt, when I got into the IPS, I stuck with philosophy. So now this decision has to be taken very wisely. We'll discuss later about how to choose the optional. The next phase, now once you clear the mains examination, also one important point is while you're writing the mains examination, you will have to fill your detailed application form, in which you will have to mention all your preferences if you get selected, what state, what cadre will you choose, what services will you opt for, and the your preference order for them. Also, your experience, your entire resume, your biodata will come in that. The next phase would be interview part, where around from this pool of 15 to 20,000 candidates, around 3,000 will be selected for the interview or the personality test, which is for 275 marks. Here you are called in the Union Public Service Commission's building at New Delhi Dholpur House, where a panel of 5 very senior civil servants and other eminent personalities, professors, and others will be sitting there and evaluating you for 30 to 35 minutes. They will have a conversation with you. And once you clear this interview stage, then around, let's say, depending on the number of seats that year, 700 to 1,000 candidates will be selected. And then based on your preference, your ranking, based on various categories and all those combinations, you will be allotted a service and cadre of based on your choice and your rank. So that's the pattern of the examination. Before I hand it over to Padma, I would like to emphasize on 2 points regarding how to prepare for it. So we will have our individual experiences about this, but personally, during my work at Morgan Stanley, I did not prepare at all for the examination. It is only when I decided to prepare that I left my job, came to New Delhi and joined a coaching institute, worked hard for a year and got selected to the IRS in my first attempt. Though there are different ways of preparing for the examination, and each of us will share our experiences. So over to you, Padma.
Deepak, I think I will just add on to what Deepak and Sir had mentioned about how to prepare and why we should be getting into the services. To start with, most of us at this stage will have the doubt of when to start preparing. And most of us wouldn't have been even sure as to whether we should be sitting for the exams or not. So when exactly is the right time? So if you are sure, of course, if you're sitting for the exam, the time is ripe and you should start preparing for the exam now. But if you're not sure whether you want to sit for the exam, then is the most crucial part. Like even without actually preparing for the exam, you can prepare for the exam in 2 ways. One is to constantly be in touch with what is happening around you, what is happening in the country and in your particular state or district, wherever you are, just to keep our eyes and ears open to what is happening around. And that will definitely help us throughout the preparation. And I'm sure both Sir and Deepak will agree with me if I say meticulously every day, all the aspirants would read the newspaper and some of them even make notes. And this will help them until they like get into the service and even after that. Second thing would be where you get the information from. We are very fortunate to have this group where we can share information and we can get information and learn from experiences of our seniors. And we can totally rely on the information we get through others' experiences. Otherwise, we have n number of resources available online these days. So as much as maybe we can get into the details of how to exactly prepare for the information and what sources to follow maybe later on. And yeah, till when we are not ready, I think that is one way to follow the news and to keep updating ourselves. The second way is to constantly working on our personality, because like Sir was mentioning, this is one service, like one exam, which is common across all the services. You will not know until you get into a service which service you're going to get. Most of us, if we are lucky enough, we will get into the service of our choice. But if you are not lucky, or if things do not fall in place, then you will have to be in a position to train your personality every day to fit into the system. So I think that is when it's most challenging one might face. So yeah, and I think we should start taking questions from here. Otherwise,
I think there have been some questions collected by the Alumni Relations Cell. Let me go through them because I think similar questions will be coming by. So one set of questions is very general questions, that is when to start preparing or when did you decide that you should start preparing for the exam. As Padma mentioned, that if you are clear about the civil services as a career, you can start as early as you like. And the campus workload is fairly light, that you will be able to spend time on preparations. I'll elaborate a bit here that you have got 7 papers, excluding the language papers. There are 7 papers that are there in the main exam. So at whatever time you start preparing, if you start if you start maybe by the 3rd year, then you should be able to at least cover a couple of papers by the time you finish college, and then spend a year trying to cover the remaining papers. That's broadly a timeline. The timeline is also discussed in our social media groups, so we can do that. There are questions. I'll put up these questions to our colleagues. There's a question that says, what was your experience at BITS and how did it shape you for a career in the civil services? Do you remember any incident or any faculty? Would you like to talk about that?
I can take that up. Like I was just mentioning on working on our personalities, that will start when we were still in BITS. That would have started actually when we were in BITS, and we try to be part of many clubs, and when we try to hone our leadership skills and be part of groups, be part of team team activities, collective activities. I think that's when we actually start shaping our personality and try to learn then. So that definitely helped me throughout my career, not just in the civil services, but the other works which I was doing before. The research skills, communication skills, your technical skills, definitely they will take you places. And knowledge about anything, any knowledge, be it technical or non-technical. When I was in BITS, I used to be part of CEL, Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership, and specifically part of a rural entrepreneurship division in it. And that really helped me. And any experience at one particular point of time, be it in BITS or outside it, will help in your next stage of career. Like the practice schools we do, I'm sure they will definitely help you in the campus interviews. And the experience you gain through your first job will help you in your second job. And that's how we need to step by step take our career forward. And that will apply the same to civil services and the exam as well. There are a few questions on a Q&A panel as well, sir. How to prepare with a job, and what is the importance of coaching institutes? Like
I'll
Deepak was
add a couple
mentioning.
of questions.
Yes.
I think in sequence there is about a fallback option. That is, should you be in a job? Can you be not in a job? Should you prepare for IES and GATE? These also, or PMRDF, these kind of questions.
Yes.
Sir,
So
I
like
think
sir
I'll take
was
that, the job part.
okay. Okay.
So when I got into Morgan Stanley, when actually my father always motivated me to write the civil services examination. Starting from my school days, he said you should read the newspaper every day. When I got into the college and then after post graduating, and when I was leaving for Morgan Stanley, he said that you instead you start preparing for civil services, because there is a notion that the earlier you get into the civil services, the higher you will rise in rank and you will stay at the top for long. But then I did not agree with this view, because I thought that I need to go into the field and work for some time to see, first of all to see whether I like what I'm doing, and secondly also because it will give me that self-confidence when I go for the civil services preparation. And it's really funny, but to this day, till today, people, when seniors, they ask us about our experiences, our earlier work acts, and everyone is surprised as to why we leave such jobs and get into the civil services. But then my personal experience is at every stage of the examination and even during the interview, it gave me a certain level of self-confidence knowing that, okay, I have some work experience with me. So if it doesn't work for me, I always have the option to go back and work in the field. In fact, some of my BITSIAN batchmates who were not as lucky in the civil services examination went back and started working from where they had left in those companies.
There is always a conversation about what is your fallback option. Should you work and continue to prepare, or quit your job and prepare full time? And should you prepare for other exams? I think these three are all interrelated. My view is this, that if you do not have a financial reason to continue your job, it is always okay to quit your job and prepare full time, or not join a job and prepare full time. There are a lot of our colleagues who have been working full time in very stressful jobs and have also prepared parallelly and cleared the exam. Those are also there. There are equally a large number of people who prepared full time. So between the two, I think it doesn't make a difference in terms of outcome in the exam, in terms of your chances of success. But in general, if one can afford not working, if financially there are parents who will be able to support, then there is no need to work and struggle with the preparation and the work. As a corollary, there is no need to prepare for two different sets of exams. There are very exciting public service exams like GATE, which recruits for a lot of PSUs. There is an engineering services exam. There is RBI's exams, economic service exam. There are a variety of exams. But unless your optional is aligned, unless you are engineering optional in the civil services, there is no point really struggling with the engineering services exam or the GATE. Unless you have economics for the civil services exam, there is no point struggling with the RBI's exam. These are ultimately fallback options as is commonly described. So I think for our audience, that the average BITSIAN audience, the chance of success in the civil service exam per se is very high. And you can always go back and have a reset. The reset is also not very difficult. So there is this trade-off of spending full time, or that your insurance policy becomes so costly that you are on preparing for 2 exams or working on all that. So this is my view, that it is always better to prepare full time and have a full commitment to one exam for maybe couple of years, and maybe reevaluate if it is needed at some point in time. There are questions about how to read newspapers and how to practice answer writing. These are very specific to the exam. So somebody who's more recent, Parik, you can try. And how to prepare answer writing and all that. I think there are a lot of YouTube videos for this. So in a general group, maybe you would like to talk a bit about it.
I think Padma is doing a lot of reading, so she should be able to tell us about how to read newspapers and all.
Okay.
Okay, why am I doing a lot of reading? No, but yes, yeah, I can definitely throw some light on it. Like I was mentioning, it depends if the exam is tomorrow or 1 year down the line. But if you read newspaper tomorrow, the newspaper 1 year down the line will be easy and a cakewalk. Because to start with, most of us are not used to reading newspapers the way we are supposed to read for the exam. Because only after some days of reading newspaper continuously, we will be able to extract what we actually want for the exam. For example, in all the answer writing in your mains papers, it's a subjective one. You should be in a position to bring your theoretical, whatever you had read in textbooks or other resources, with the happenings around which usually get printed in the newspaper. Given a question, there is an answer, and in which there should be a theory part as well as an application part. So you will get all the data for that application part in from the newspapers, and you cannot make notes out of everything that is mentioned in the newspaper, but as and when you feel that, okay, this could be used there, or this particular point can be used in this particular paper, you should be making very light notes. And everything is relative and personal again. What is working well for somebody might not work for others. So I always suggest that you listen to everybody, but at the end you make your own way and you make your own path. Again, I would like to add something which sir has said here. If it is affordable for you, it is fine to quit your job, whatever your existing jobs and other career options you have, and prepare full time. But at the same time, you might not be disheartened and think that those who are preparing full time are at an advantage, because I've prepared throughout working somewhere else. So it's hard. Of course, it's hard. You will get less number of hours. You'll be more tired at the end of the day. But we should always be approaching this exam as a process, as a learning process, and never lose heart, and always be ready for the worst to come. And then you will enjoy even little best, whatever comes out of this. And with respect to any exam preparation, people are asking here whether online coaching, everything and anything you can do, whatever is affordable and whatever works for you. Not everybody will be able to go to Delhi and prepare, but if it is definitely helping you, you should go to Delhi and talk to our seniors and search online whatever are the new institutes which are coming up. And there is a lot of well organized material available these days to which we can subscribe for current affairs. Even if when we don't have time, we can subscribe to their monthly newsletter editions and just go through them and then extract whatever notes we want from that. This is with respect to the exam. If I may take few more minutes, people are asking me here to throw some light on what Indian Foreign Service is all about, the work, the kind of work we do every day. Because of the three services here, I'm sure this is the less known service. Even before I could join the service, I hardly had any information with me. So I think I should share that information with you now. Like sir was mentioning, an Indian Foreign Service officer as an Indian diplomat will be representing India in like in whatever assignments he'll be assigned to outside the world. After I joined the service, I was in Egypt, and then I was in the US, in Washington, DC, and then now I'm in Qatar. So in all the places, India is my unit for all functional purposes. I only talk about India. Like I only represent India. And but to whom do I represent India? To diplomats from other countries who are posted in that country, to the ministry of like the to the diplomats of that host country, like Egyptian diplomats, and to all the senior dignitaries, different sections of the society, like what all different sections of society we have in India, we have our counterparts there. So on a daily basis, a diplomat's job is to try and build that goodwill, which will help in strengthening and enhancing the bilateral relationships with that country, between India and that country. Given already so much is being done, like historically, we have very good relationships with many countries. So building on that, every day, it's job of an IFS officer to establish cultural, political, economic, trade, commerce, educational, whatever other aspects of a defense, whatever other aspects of a particular bilateral relationship. On a daily basis, we should build that goodwill. And what a seed we are planting today will help us years down the lane, but it will bring fruits definitely. And that is the hope with which an IFS officer works. And with respect to working outside the country, yes, there are challenges. The most prominent one being you will be away from your family. You won't get to meet them as often as you would want to. And the worst part is even they don't want to travel to see you as often they want to. And there are issues, and during this pandemic, it's even more difficult to travel. So that is definitely a challenge, but what challenges are there in other services as well, like Deepak and Sir will throw more light on the challenges faced in their services, but challenges are definitely there. Being away from country, being away from your family, it's always a challenge. And outside the country, it's not that things will be done for you. You will have to do everything by yourself, most of the things. So it's a bit challenging initially, but later on you will get used to it and you will start enjoying the work, because the kind of exposure you get, the kind of people you meet, you will get everyday satisfaction from your work.
Thanks, Padma. Two quick questions I saw here. Can I take them, please?
Go on.
There is
I
also a
unmuted my
set questions. There is also a set of questions sent to you, collected through the Google form that also you can address.
Sir, yes, sir. Sir, I'll take these two first. These questions just popped. The first is how to handle the randomness of the prelim examination. So, in my view, prelims will definitely test your knowledge of facts, especially the paper one. So people read so many books, the economic survey, the India Air book, and so on. So prelims is, of course, an exam of facts. No matter how analytical the question is, unless you know the facts correctly, it will be really difficult. The second, from my experience, second is you have to attempt more questions. If you attempt really less number of questions in the prelim examination, your chances of getting through, I think, reduce. And the third is to find your optimal number of attempts that you should make. Like when I started preparing in my first attempt, earlier I used to attempt 70 out of 100 in my test series. Then I went to 80, 85, 90. So I realized there is an optimal number of questions if I attempt that suits my guesses also, and my probability of getting through is higher. And that is when I started, in my test series, I started doing better. So the last point, the last suggestion from my side is you will have to practice more. That applies to every stage of the examination, pre and mains, but you will have to join test series and practice more to see what is your optimal level of the length of answers in the mains exam to complete the paper, and also in the preliminary, what is the number of guesses or the number of attempts that you are going to take. Sir and Padma, if you'd like to add anything on that part.
I think by now the coaching institutes as well as online resources have cracked it. That said, there are earlier there used to be 150 questions in the general studies paper. By that is broken down into those 12-15 subjects. So if you go through the past several years question papers, that gives you a good sense. I mean, all said and done, it is an exam. And for this group of people, like for example, Padma is a board topper. There must be 10 board toppers who are out of this 298 participants. There must be 10 board participants. Hold on, Ba. Just a minute. So somebody was asking me about work-life balance. So this is work-life balance.
That's true. Give me a few minutes and my baby is going to cry.
Yeah. So I think passing the exam is straightforward. That even when there is a great resource, the internet is available. There are people who are very transparent with their experiences. There are all kinds of toppers interviews that you find on Quora, you find on all resources. You can skim through them and get a good sense of each of this. That is, how do you build brick by brick that this 80 questions or 90 questions that you want to reach? That is the prelims. How do you pick up an optional, which is the trade-off between learning a totally new subject and building on your own degree subject? So this is basically passing an exam. Let's not complicate it more than that. To that level, I think it is straightforward. And for people who are from a good academic background, let's not complicate it more than that. If you see the past 10 years exams, you will know how to pass it. Each of us will know how to pass it. There's another set of questions that I've got. I think this appears specific to the IAS. There are questions like what makes the IAS different from other services? What all powers does an IAS officer have, and work-life balance? And generally job as a district magistrate or collector. For these kind of questions, I'd sum it up like this. See, this is an all India service. That means it is common between the state government and the central government. In the state government, you could see that there are units called districts. So most of, if you divide the career into maybe 4 parts or 3 parts, 1/3 of it is in the districts. That is either as an officer below the district level or head of a district, whatever is called district magistrate or district collector or deputy commissioner, depending on the state. So this is a territorial jurisdiction where you coordinate all departments. There is no specialization. This is what we hear about, generalists versus specialists, these kind of debates. So there are maybe 50 departments in a district. So they would like to, there is still an arrangement that expects the district collector will coordinate between the departments and provide some leadership in key areas. So this is the district level job that goes on for maybe 1/3 of the career. The next third, I would say, will be in the state level, where one heads departments. There are vertical departments where the government's policies are made and implemented. So you could think of anything from animal husbandry or agriculture to infrastructure departments to school education or health or any of these social departments. So in each of this, I would say this is the second 1/3 of career. The third 1/3 would be again further specializing in the union government. So it is either a local government like a municipal corporation or a district, or a state government or a central government. What one is able to see from outside the exam is in Mofasal or in from district towns, you are able to have visibility to a district collector. Or if you read the pink papers, whatever is visible is the more specialized economic ministries and this kind of job. But that is, I think, part of the appeal of this service, that you go through this variety of jobs and meet a variety of people. And in some places it doesn't work. Some places it is breaking down. We should concede that this may not be the most optimum way of dealing with extremely specialized subjects. So that is why you have lateral entry, that there is a hot discussion going on all over the world, all over the country about where would lateral entry people fit in. So definitely there are very specialized areas that the Prime Minister himself has mentioned very clearly, that you will need lateral entry in sectors where your district or state experience would not help the country. It is not about, a service trying to grab more space or have less space. So this is, I think, broadly what the IAS is doing. There are very tough questions. It's saying, do you take decisions in the interest of the government or the people? So I think that is a trick question. I think the government and the people is the well-functioning democracy. They are together. The government's decisions are basically for the people's welfare. I think that trick question I will skip. Have you faced any politicians with illegitimate demands, and how did you respond to it? Well, I think Parikh would be facing more of this, or as often as I do. The thing is, there is a clear line of what is legitimate, what is illegitimate, what is right and what is wrong. So we evolve our systems to deal with what is right, what is wrong. There is a very nice question that says, I want to be in a position where I can strictly implement policies and help the poor But for that, I will also need money. What is the income of an IAS officer? Do IAS officers live a luxurious life along with dedicated service? I think there are two parts to this question. For this, that to implement policies and help the poor, one is not spending from their salary. So for whatever you are implementing, for whatever budget you need, that is the whole apparatus of the state that collects taxes, that raises revenues, that takes loans, that does something and mobilizes the resources. That is the whole task of the state, and you are part of the state. I will put it this way, that with the money that you make as salary, then there is hardly anything that you can, contribute as an individual upper middle class person. But as part of the state machinery, there is an enormous work that can be done. And there is enormous amount of low hanging fruit in our country. I'll connect this with another question. There is a question that asks, what has given you great satisfaction? For example, you see mentally ill people on the road. This is not an unusual sight that you see people half naked and, maggot infested and wounded. In every large city, you will find a dozen people that overnight, if you tour the place, you will find it. You will find a dozen people who are very badly in need of assistance. Now, there are many ways of approaching this. There are a life of public service. I have a close friend who has given her full life to building a large home for the mentally ill. She rescues people from difficult circumstances, treats them and rehabilitates them. That is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is that, as for example, district magistrate or a member in the health department, in the executive in the health department, or social justice department, one could mobilize the state machinery. But as an individual, that may not be possible. That can one person do it? That will call for a different set of skills. But can a department led by a mid-level bureaucrat do it? Yes, I think we can do it. So that is a connection between what policies one can implement and what satisfaction one gets. So let us think of, we are not working for the state, we are working through the state. We are working for the people. So this whole machinery of the state is available to support the work for the people. There's one last question that says, do you think the knowledge you gained at BITS helped you over the years, and what aspects of UPSC preparation help you in your experience? Okay, the second part is the UPSC preparation. In the UPSC preparation, you will learn a totally new subject. Like we learned anthropology or something that one would have never heard of in college. So that is quickly understanding the subject and assimilating it and presenting it. That is one skill that helps all of us in irrespective of whatever service. That is that learnability, what you find in many careers, that gets strengthened in the civil services exam preparation. The other thing is this idea of, persevering. All of us are very smart people who were went to Pilani would have never seen academic failure. A lot of us would have been board toppers. A lot of us would have been, topping various exams. But academic failure will be a surprise. I'm only adding to whatever Padma mentioned, that there will be a lot of surprises that you thought you read well and suddenly the exam is not helping you, you are out of the list. So that perseverance builds during the exam, which is very, very helpful in the service, that you shamelessly keep doing your thing forever till it gets done. I think that is a skill that in your normal engineering education doesn't give, that you can, it clicks and you pass the engineering test. So that perseverance is something that we can pick up. And from influence from BITS, I would like to make a mention of two people who influenced me tremendously. One is Professor Sundar, who used to be our chief warden. I think now he's director Hyderabad campus. I think he was a very formative influence on me as a manager, that he was managing a very messy department called the student welfare dean. He was dean student welfare. So I thank Professor Sundar for his inspiration. Second is I thank Professor Gurunarayanan, who used to teach us electronics, for his extraordinarily professional and prepared style of doing things. So these are very formative influences on me. I mean, I don't do much electronics. My electronics is only the remote control or something. But in terms of preparation for the next day, I think I learned from him a lot. So these are questions addressed to me specifically. Yeah, others can continue. There are questions in the panel also.
Thank you, sir. I'll also, bunch these questions and take them up. So this is an interesting one which says, were you always a brave heart? So, no. The simple answer would be all of us are very normal people. I was also a very normal boy. In fact, I never picked up a fight with anyone during my schooling or even during my BITSEN days because, Padma, she's my batchmate, so she knows what kind of people we are. But about the bravery part, or about, why officers in uniform, they change their personalities. It is true that when we are meeting people, we have poker faces, we are very different. I think we will not even be communicating like we are doing with you right now. So we kind of adorn a different personality because that is the demand of our jobs. In fact, sir's job, that is the demand that comes from our offices, our uniforms, that we have to have a certain kind of personality. Also, there's a different factors are there. For example, our training. So it is a very long training. Every day you are told to be disciplined. You are in fact trained. Your muscle memory also comes into effect. The second is the sense of responsibility which comes from wearing the khaki or the uniform, or even being in that particular position. If you are the collector or you are representing the country anywhere, or whichever officer, whichever rank you are, the sense of responsibility that comes from having that position being given to you, being entrusted to you by the state, the faith that the state has in you, you get that power from within. You get the power to take the lead. And then you know that 1,000 eyes are watching you every time. Your own men are looking at you. The public is looking at you. They have the expectation that yes, the officer will show us the way when things are difficult. So in a difficult situation, there is no other option for us but to be brave. So that's how I like to put it. The second question is, how risky and hectic is the life of an IPS officer? I'll say broadly it applies to other officers in the field also. There is, as sir was discussing earlier, there is every kind of risk involved. There's political vendetta, then there is these different gangsters, people who are doing illegal activities, they will threaten you, your families. Some of our IPS officers, in fact, Shri Narendra Kumar, who was killed by the mining mafia in the MP, I remember that. Few of the officers in West Bengal, one of the senior DCP, his hand was, severely injured. In fact, one of our just immediately junior batch colleague recently during the Shaheen Bagh incident in Delhi, he also had some, he was trying to save his DCP and he had to face the crowd. He had some cervical fracture. He was hospitalized and bedridden for a few months. So these are the kind of risks that we face because we are easily identifiable in the uniform, and also other officers because they are identified in the field. So they always have this risk. Because of these stands that you take against, if let's say you see that there is some flaw in the system or there is something happening which you think needs correction, many times you may find that there are not many people who are willing to support you or stand with you in that fight. So sometimes it is the risk that you have to take. But then, then this is a choice between your comfort and your principles. So during these difficult times, what most officers would do is they would see where the balance lies for them, whether they want their comfort, a particular thing, or whether their principles or the sense of responsibility that comes with their position. And then I think it's always an individual call that people take. Whether it is always risky, I don't think so. It depends on your posting, because let's say someone who's posted in an Naxal district. In fact, my wife is also an IPS officer, my batchmate, so she tells me stories of when in Odisha she has been leading operations in the night carrying 2 AK-47s with her. I don't think in Punjab I would have ever faced such kind of a risk. But then depending on your posting, depending on the job profile, you will have different kind of risks. Then about the hectic part, yes, it is hectic because the amount of responsibility and administration has increased. You see, the latest example is the Corona case. I think sir will also agree with me that the administration has been on its toes for 24/7. And we always felt that we were short of officers because there was so much to do. Apart from that, the regular work will never stop. So yes, the jobs are hectic. Talking about police particularly, we are not just there to supervise investigations, prevention and control of crime, but we are also, as sir rightly pointed out, we are the HR managers of our particular departments. We are also the institution builders. And introduction, we have to introduce changes in the system and also adopt those changes. So, we have to do short-term planning, long-term planning and implementation of things. So of course, the job is hectic, but then you also need to take more time out. And recently, I think, especially in the past few years, during training also, they tell us that you need to have work-life balance. And the concept of work-life balance has, gained more popularity, so to say. So, in fact, I remember when I was ASP in Pathankot, Dalhouse and Dharamshala were near. So sometimes I used to make a trip, but then as your rank or position increases, you hardly get much time. The next question is, what are the attributes for an IPS officer? Now, again, we write the exam hoping that we will get a particular rank or we will get a particular service, but then we don't write it for one particular service. Most of us, as I told you earlier, we give references for services. Let's say there was one question also whether one should put IAS, IPS, IFS. That's a personal choice. You can read more about the kind of work that every service is doing. Many of my friends have put IPS at the first position. Many have put IFS. Some have also put IRS in the first position. Most of them go for the IAS. So that's a personal choice, and it varies from. For IPS particularly, from my experience, I can tell you that the only thing that requires you to clear the tough training, comparatively tougher training, I'd say, is the positive attitude. Training, there was another question which was asking whether training is difficult. Yes, I will say it is not that easy, because you are not going to the academy just fresh out of your 12th standard, but after graduation, post-graduation, your jobs. Many of us are, masters. Many of us are, people who are doctors, who are masters in their field in medicine. So at 26, 27, 28 till 32, 33, if you're getting into that, physical training at that point is really difficult. But then we have the training is, it gradually it increases. They keep looking at, they're changing the training every year. We have the best trainers from all the paramilitary forces, from police. In fact, we have many IPS officers they have to train us. The training is tough, but then everyone at the National Police Academy will help you sail through. I don't remember any such case where an officer was thrown out of the service because he or she could not clear the training, which means all of us can do it. Another interesting question is whether uniform is compulsory on all working days. Uni- Uniform is never compulsory for an officer, for an IPS officer, a district SP, but then we wear it because we take pride in our uniform, because it gives us our identity, because also it is easy to identify an officer in case of a riot situation or in case of an all order. Otherwise also it is easy to distinguish and identify our own. And the funny bit is, in the National Police Academy, whenever, there are different kind of dresses that you have to wear. For dinner, you cannot go to the mess without wearing formals. For this particular thing, you have to wear a tie, for this a coat and all that. So when we get confused and we ask our seniors that what should we wear on this particular event, then the answer is, when in doubt, always wear the uniform. So that's what we get used to over years. Like what I'm doing right now. In fact, I was earlier in the series, but my wife asked me that you're an IPS officer, so you're addressing people to your friends to motivate them, you should be in your uniform. The next question is, how do you, affect what is the feeling of, and how do you bring change to the life of others every day? So, sir has answered that partly. Some bits I will also add from my side from policing experience. See, policing, we have to handle a spectrum of things from murders, dacoities to cyber crimes. I think many of you would have seen those series regarding those people in Jharkhand doing cyber crimes and other, sophisticated crimes as they are coming up. But then, the kind of complaints we also get is कि मेरे पड़ोसी का पानी मेरे घर के सामने आ रहा है और इनका डॉगी हमारे घर के सामने घुमाते हैं. मतलब, from the smallest problems to the biggest problems, you will have to, take them up and address them for people. In big cities like Ludhiana, we see, I have seen that, most people have started throwing their parents, their senior citizens out of their houses. Now, if you can threaten, if by force, by some other means, if you can make sure that, the elderly are given their due, if you feel that, someone who's not as powerful, during our entire day, we listen to so many people. Most of them have access to us because, they know the system, they can reach us. But some of them, they are very poor. They will come to us hoping that, when they've gone to every other level and they feel that, they are being wronged by the system. If you can bring change to one such life, I think all of us will agree, it gives us a sound sleep for so many days together. Last question that I'll take is regarding the deputation, whether the IPS officers can go to central organizations. Answering in very short, we can go to all the organizations like CBI, IB, RNDW, BPRND, central paramilitary forces also, like the CRPF, CISF, BSF, etc. Officers, the All India Services officers can also go to other states, which is the interstate deputation after 9 years of service. I'm reading it out because I've just noted it down. And the minimum requirement for deputation is 7 years. For IB and DO, etc., it is 5 years. And yeah, that's mostly it means, as sir has already told, that now the systems are changing, the governance reforms are coming up, there are more opportunities coming up for every service. In fact, many of my friends from the revenue service for the last so many years have been in the Ministry of Railway and other ministries. In fact, on the GST panels and other such opportunities will keep coming in the future, I believe. Thank you so much.
ARC can tell us if there are some questions that are that we missed or something.
Set of questions.
Padma's set of questions are still there.
Yes, sir, we had put it on the WhatsApp.
Yeah, I'll try to answer some of the questions which was sent to me on WhatsApp. Like, what are the various domains an IFS officer will get an opportunity to work? Within the country, the main ministry is Ministry of External Affairs, whose headquarters is in Delhi. So most of the IFS officers will be working out of Delhi, but those who are posted as regional passport officers, they will be working in various cities across the country. Other than this, we also have a post within each of the states, like MEA works in coordination with the states. Why? Because when we are trying to represent India and its various business or trade commerce opportunities, it'll be most useful to work with state as a unit rather than the country as a whole. And once outside the country, of course, we work across all the embassies placed like more than 190 countries across the world. Other than that, IFS officers can also be posted in multilateral organizations like the UN in New York and Geneva and other multilateral organizations and regional organizations like, say, SCO. So staying within the embassy embassy within a particular city, we will be working with all the multilateral organizations as well. And even though an IFS officer is posted in one country, he or she can be sent on temporary assignments to other countries, on temporary duties to other countries. For example, though I was posted in Egypt, I got an opportunity to go to Jordan as well, and the regional countries. I was posted in DC, but I was deployed for a few days to work at the UN when United Nations General Assembly sessions were taking place. For 2 years, I was there. So you get various opportunities like this and various kinds of exposure at where multilateral institutions and organizations like the UN are present in that particular country. And there are a few questions about IFS training. So the training we go through at Foreign Service Institute, it includes general training on diplomacy, communication skills, what to do, what not to do, how to deal with when we are interacting with other diplomats or the host countries. And like Deepak was mentioning, as for women officers, when in doubt, we always wear sari. When in doubt, he always wears his uniform, right? But when in doubt, we always have to wear sari because we are representing India. So culturally, anything, we should be reflecting India in all possible ways, the way we speak or the way we dress, the way we are interacting as diplomats. It's the other way, what Deepak has mentioned. Though if we have to say no and if we have to shout at somebody, we still do that with a smile on our face. And with respect to training, after an officer finishes his or her training at the Foreign Service Institute in Delhi, basing on their merit as well as preference, he or she will be assigned a particular language. It's called Compulsory Foreign Language, CFL. I have chosen Arabic as my CFL, and I was sent to Egypt to learn Arabic. So it was around 1.5 to 2 years of training. And while we are training, we will also get an opportunity to work at that particular embassy, like in my case, Embassy of India in Cairo. So the whole language is a very unique and different experience. And few of us, recently it's a new policy started in the ministry, that few of us who have that trait and the knack for language will be given an opportunity to do a higher course in the particular language. Like I had that, and I cleared University of Maryland master's course in Arabic English interpreting. So I got an opportunity to finish my master's in interpreting with Arabic and English as my combination. And this is like very unique case. It doesn't happen with everybody, so don't go by this. I'm just sharing my experience. So one of the questions says, your training, like you being a student for 2 years and getting trained in a language, will it affect your career in IFS in any way? No, it does not. It will actually help us and open many doors, open many avenues to interact with the foreign country dignitaries and diplomats here, like in Qatar. Most of them speak English, but not very fluently. So it's always advantageous to speak in their language. So that's where the CFL helps an IFS officer to in his or her daily work routine. And how tough is the training? Of course, learning language at this age is tough, but not tougher than the exam, I should say. Learning languages are fun. And work-life balance, like the other panelists mentioned, it will always be a challenge. It will be there forever. It's almost up to the individual how he or she is managing. And I feel like I'm still a student, and I feel as if I'm still in the engineering college. Sometimes there is work you have to do in the last minute, like we'll be preparing for our supplees in the last minute. So I still do that. And that really helps also for your work-life balance. Sometimes work is more, sometimes you can, it's all how do we manage our time. And specifically with respect to getting posted in other countries, whether your family and all will be allowed, yes, of course, you can take your family along, and it's always allowed, but just that it's not always feasible because everybody will have their preferences and they would want to work elsewhere. That again is an extra level of challenge with respect to your work and the personal life balance in IFS. There are some funny questions like, how do I become a foreign secretary? Did you meet Prime Minister Modi? Of course, you get into the service and you will meet everybody you're supposed to meet. So I was mentioning about my temporary duties to the United Nations. That's where on the sidelines of United Nations General Assembly sessions, we will also have bilateral meetings between India and other countries. So that's where I got an opportunity to sit as part of the meetings where our external affairs minister and our PM with his counterparts and our EAM with his or her counterparts were there. So and not everybody will get the same opportunity, and not every career graph will look the same. So any experience we get is good. And the very word foreign will include all countries as in all countries. So because we in India, we think foreign is always good, but when foreign includes, it could be any country. That's why we have a list which says A posting, B posting, and C posting. So C posting are comparatively tougher ones. Some could be war hit or conflict. Every day they must be going through some conflicts, or the issues like the kind of issues we face with our Western neighbor. And B is the medium level ones, and A is like the good topmost ones. And depending upon which country one will get an opportunity to become an ambassador, those many years will take. Suppose in the A, we have United States, UK, and Russia, all bigger countries. So only senior most officers will become ambassadors to those countries. Like our present foreign secretary, just before becoming foreign secretary last year, he was ambassador of India to the US. So it all depends. So everybody's career graph is different, and don't worry about at what stage or at what age you're entering into the services, because everybody's experiences, not everybody can become a foreign secretary. Just like not everybody can become a prime minister just because he or she is in the same political party. So it all applies. Is your job profile, and do you do some public dealing, or it's a desk work? It's an important question because we usually don't have much of a public dealing like the other services do. But the only public dealing, most of the public dealing we do is like with the Indians is at our passport offices. And even in the missions, we have consular division where people approach us for visas. And Indians who are living abroad, like in this part of the region or in Qatar in particularly, we have more than 700,000 Indians, 7 lakh Indians living in this country, more than the national population here. And in this part of the region, we have millions of Indians living. Most of them are blue collar workers here. So every day they have some or the other issues, and they approach us at the embassy. and usually they have many issues because like we have thousands and thousands of rules. The foreign government here, it will also have its own set of rules. So that's where embassy as a whole and IFS officers role will come in, wherein we will have to deal the situation or deal the case in a way that it will help both of us, of course, and it will help the Indian who is either stranded or facing some issues here. So this part of the region, the Gulf region, usually deals and has a lot of consular issues to deal with. And the kind of public interaction we have, it always depends on the number of Indians living in that country. Other public interactions we have is, of course, meeting people from other countries, meeting people from the host countries. And in every interaction, we try and portray brand India and tell them what all good things and developments happening back in the country, and see how we can take the relationship forward. I think those are the questions from my side, unless there are any more new questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering these questions. We have a lot of questions on the chat panel as well. So if you find any relevant questions, sir, ma'am, which were not answered, please feel free to take them up, and then we could further wrap up the session. Thank you.
Okay. How do you prepare along with the job? It's, as I mentioned, it's always challenging, but it's not an impossible task to do. We should be clear in our minds that this is what I have. I cannot afford more time than this. So whatever time I have to utilize for my preparation. And just like your work-life balance, you will have your job and preparation life balance in that scenario.
There is a question which says that is it advisable to offer optional subject that we have graduated in? So that's a very, I think when I was looking for optional subjects, I was looking at subjects which are more scoring, and we look at the trends in the last 4 or 5 years, whether these subjects have been doing well. And also it is advisable to look at the last 4 or 5 years, 10 years question papers and the kind of questions that appear for that particular subject in the examination, in case we are planning to take that as an optional. However, as sir has pointed out, if you think you can do well in a particular subject after looking at the set of questions and the previous papers, you can take any optional that you like, but mostly the experience will look at which are the most popular and scoring subjects. Nagaran sir, there is a question which says, do you spend 80% of your day supervising? So I think this will be best answered by you.
See, as an executive job, what you do is whatever we learn in management second year, that is planning, organizing, staffing, leading, coordinating. So there is another question that is asking, is 80% goes in grievance redressal? No. I'm talking from the DM point of view, the district collector point of view. So in 30 days a month in my districts, whenever I worked, I would have toured, I would have gone along and visited places for 15 days a month. And there are a variety of departments, so each department will need a different style, like hospitals or schools or roads or any of these things. So it is not 80% is not grievance redressal. That if you run your regular services properly, you should not be required to meet so many people and hear individual grievances. I think in a better run state, the individual grievances will be less. We see a decreasing trend of number of seats in UPSC. So we are worried whether we should leave the job and prepare for these exams. See, in the best of times, it is 1,000 seats. In the worst of times, it is 250 seats. There is no difference between 250 and 1,000 on a base of 10 lakh. So this reduction in seats should not matter for preparing. Then, is it possible to remain with a unique personality and personal opinion, even though the state government and central government would otherwise want you to be an easy rubber stamp? I think there are a lot of assumptions are in this question. In our, there is a professional ethic that every legitimate decision of a superior has to be obeyed. And every decision that is within your own power, one's own power, should not be kicked upwards or downwards. So these are two sides of the same coin. That if it is, the Joint Commissioner of Police's power, the Joint Commissioner of Police should decide on it. He should not kick it up to the Commissioner of Police asking for what to do. And the other side of the coin is if the Commissioner of Police has directed the Joint Commissioner to do something, as long as it is legitimate, that will be followed. I think this sums up what has been settled for over 100 years in the civil services. And unique personality and personal opinion continue. There is a sweet spot between, the bureaucratic machinery and individual creativity that continues. How would you contrast the life of being an entrepreneur and eventual philanthropy versus working in civil services? Okay, that is a hard question. This Nicholas, our Taleb, he talks about two different worlds. That is extremistan and mediocristan. That the fact of the matter is that civil services will be a mediocristan. The mediocristan in the sense that everybody gets similar outcomes. That your exam is an extremistan, that one person could pass the exam and the other person would not pass an exam. There is a very great deal of difference between the two. But in the cohort of people who pass the exam, around maybe the 100 people, there is not a great deal of difference between them in their career tracks. That is like an MBA. That is like an MBA in a large company. So this question's proxy is, would you prefer being in, a startup company or in a large established company? The commercial example would be that. So this will be a very personal choice. There is an advantage in being in a large system, that is stability and scale. There is an advantage in being in a startup or entrepreneurship, that there is a possibility of a very big upside. Do public policy graduates work closely with civil servants and have similar nature of work? I think Government of India is having a good space for a lot of public policy graduates, that is as consultants. As I think in our times, there will be a lot of lateral entrants who are coming in from the public policy background. As of now, the market for public policy graduates is not very rich. There are very few people who are ready to pay for this skill. The government is the singular large employer for this skill. We have too few of think tanks. We have too few of consulting organizations. We have too few of NGOs who are professionally run. But I think that is changing over the next, 10, 20, 30 years. This is getting richer, and we hope that there will be a lot of exchange of personnel between all these sectors. Is it advisable to do a job after graduation for a couple of years in order to gain some exposure and prepare? Or is it equally advantageous to start preparing right after graduation? I think earlier the better. That if you have made up your mind that this is an appealing career, there is an upper age limit to joining the civil services, unlike many other careers. So it's always better to start early, get into the civil services early, and if you don't like it, quit. Rather than the other way of, spend some time in another organization and then try to get into the civil services at a senior age. Of course, you go there and then like from Morgan Stanley, you can come, that is always there. But if both are equally available, then this is the easier route. These are some questions that have come to me.
Sir, one question, an interesting question is, is the job of an IPS officer like a detective? And I really take interest in detective job and investigating jobs, so should I consider the IPS? Now, to the answer the first part, yes, some part of our job is also like a detective because we are responsible for every, for following up and ensuring that investigation into every kind takes place to the best of our ability. From personal experience, after a while, you start feeling, there is, so many people looking at you. There is media, there is your subordinates, your superiors. That any crime that happens, people start to feel as if you have committed that crime. To the extent that you will give your day and night, your blood and sweat to make sure that any sensational crimes are traced in time, the person gets justice. So after a while, that personal elements also starts getting involved. So yes, you will also do the detection part because you will be supervising, you see, because we are trained for detection and investigation also. So, there is a concept of supervisory notes. So every FIR of the district SP or whatever rank in the commissioner, the DCP, the JCP, they will look at the files and they will give supervisory notes directing that this part of the investigation is not going properly and this is how it should be done. And our other officers are supposed to follow those instructions. Also, in the recent past, in high-profile cases, there is concept of special investigation teams involving IPS officers. So, in fact, very senior officers, in case of big scams, they are also involved in the state in investigations, so where they directly investigate. Thirdly, if you go to organizations like the NIA, with the CBI, at SP ranks, in SP rank, there is immense level of investigation that you do. So yes, if you like these kind of things, there is unlimited opportunity. Also, regarding this is really close to my heart, so I like to bring this topic up. We always talk about crime detection and investigating, but then in policing, most of our day goes into preventive and proactive policing. How to prevent crime, how to prevent traffic jams from happening, how to prevent snatchings from happening. And we plan our days, we plan our NACA duties, everything like that, the placement of our cameras, our PCR bands, everything we plan with our eye on prevention. But that is one aspect of policing which is hardly acknowledged because unless a crime happens, nobody knows what the policeman was doing the entire day. So yes, apart from detection, a big part of our job also goes into the preventive aspect. But that will not be, as challenging or, it will not get as much of publicity as the investigating bit.
So I think we are almost out of time. If there is something specific, Padma can share something, or the organizers, would you like to say something or ask us something? I think we are just about time.
So I believe that's about it. If Padma ma'am wants to go for some questions, we are very welcome, but that's the questions from our side. I think we'll wrap it up. Sir, any concluding statements, like anything you want to say before we wrap it up?
Okay, my conclusion is that we need as many Bitsians to, attempt this exam and join the civil services. It's a very exciting career and it needs the best minds to tackle the toughest problems of this country. And still there is a great scope for the civil services. The toughest problems are in the governance of our country. Please consider writing the exam and joining the civil services.
Thank you, Nagarajan Esther, Ms. Padmakari ma'am, and Deepak sir for sharing your journeys with us and clearing all the doubt in each aspirant's mind. With this, we come to the end of our BITS 2 Civil Services session. I would like to express immense gratitude and thank all the panelists for making today's talk possible. And thank you all for attending this talk. We hope that it proved to be insightful and will help you achieve your dreams. Please fill up the feedback form that has been put up in the chat box. Each suggestion is valuable to us. Telegram and Google group links of IAS aspirants monitored by Nagarajan sir will be provided in the chat. Do join them if you're interested. Good night and all the very best.
Thank you, Jai
Thank
Hind.
you. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for having us.
Thank you, sir, for coming.
Thank you,
you.
sir, for coming.
Thank you, ma'am.